20 points between the top three drivers in the F4 Saudi Arabia Championship 2025. 75 points left on the table. Plenty still to play for. We won't crown our champion until December, but we can certainly take a step closer to finding out who it's going to be. We're back once again on the Jeddah Corniche circuit for another day of activity. We had a little bit of a damp race yesterday. Incredibly, the real rain really hit the circuit last night after the racing was over, flooding in the various areas around the circuit, and a few damp patches coming to the circuit this morning. Fortunately, around here, just by the Red Sea, the heat and the humidity has done its work to bring the circuit back to normal running and procedure. The only difficulty today compared to yesterday, of course, is that huge rainstorm that hit the circuit will have rubbed a lot of the circuit clean. And so this 40-minute practice session heading into round 4, race 2, will be an interesting one for the drivers as they relearn the circuit in a very different position. Hello again, everybody. Jake Sanson here in the commentary box once more for you as we get ourselves ready for the last free practice session of November 2025 in the F4 Saudi Arabia Championship presented by Aramco. It's round 4, it's free practice 2, and 40 minutes out on the course will give us another clear indication as to who's going to be on pace. Now, if you weren't here with us yesterday, we had a very interesting day at the office, a normal free practice session that took us from green to checkered without incident of 40 minutes. Then we had the 20-minute qualifying session in which Lewis Werrell, the British driver, was able to grab his first pole position as we take a look at Chiara Battistini, who was the fastest of the qualifiers of the ladies category, but then she sadly had problems with her tyres and then dropped down outside the top 10. Couldn't get a feel in the tyres in the wet conditions, and so lost a lot of ground. Megan Bruce, however, did manage to come through for a point-scoring finish yesterday with a 9th place, her joint best result of the season. 3 times now she's been in the top 10, and the number 9 finishing P9 for the 3rd race weekend in a row. Fantastic performance then from Ava Dobson yesterday. She had a really strong run to 7th position, very nearly taking a Ladies' Cup victory. And that would have been, of course, her 2nd of the season. Only Nina Hardeman, Ava Dobson and Esme Hosterman have taken Ladies' Cup victories over the season so far. So we could well have ended up with a 2nd victory of the season for Ava Dobson. We could well end up with a 4th different female winner with just 3 races to go. But the pole positions have been fought out between Theo Palmer and Adam Al-Azari of the United Arab Emirates and Kit Bolofsky and Lewis Werrell of Great Britain over the last few events. This man, Scott Kien-Lindblom, is looking for his first pole position, certainly taken his first victory. He did that on Tuesday night after a 5-second time penalty for both Adam Al-Azari and Lewis Werrell dropped them down the order. There was also a 5-second penalty for Lewis Werrell yesterday, unfortunately. That dropped him to 5th position, which is now 50 points for him. And so the challenge is going to be an interesting one. And unfortunately, finishing in 5th position in yesterday's race has now made it mathematically impossible for Lewis Werrell to claim this year's championship. Of course, it was always going to be a long shot joining in from round 3, but after winning on his debut, there was a lot of expectation from the British driver that maybe he might be able to claw back some of those results. That is now no longer the case. In fact, there are only 4 drivers now who mathematically can be the champion. Kit Bolofsky, Adam Al-Azari, Scott Kien-Lindblom and Thibaut Ramakas. They are the only 4 who have the chance to do so. There is Faris Organji, one of the 3 drivers from Saudi Arabia, one of the 2 competitors from here in Jeddah. This is the man who's trying to keep his slender chances of winning the Drivers' Championship alive. The Belgian star, Thibaut Ramakas, full of consistency. He's finished in the top 6 every single race this year. But none of those so far have been in the top 3. So he's had 3 4th position finishes, 2 5ths and 2 6th coming up to this race. And so he has managed to attain 70 championship points. There are 75 still available, and the championship leader, Kit Bolofsky, has 128. So it is mathematically possible in this race that Kit Bolofsky can drop Thibaut Ramakas out of the championship fight. But for the moment, it's all about free practice. That is the main focus of everybody's attention. as we head out for 40 minutes on the course. So the main task is to learn the circuit again after the very heavy rainstorm that hit last night. It was absolutely torrential conditions. We actually had a real struggle getting from the circuit to the hotel last night. It was very difficult on the public highway. Goodness knows what it would have been like on the race circuit itself. And how fortunate we were that we were able to run the race the way we were, rather than have the absolute deluge and monsoon downpour that we had at about 11:30 p.m. last night. That would have been absolutely horrendous for the competitors to deal with, and we certainly wouldn't have got a race in at all. But we managed to dodge that. What it has done, though, is it's washed a lot of the surface clean going into this race. When we say clean, we are, of course, talking about a lot of the rubber that is laid down on the course is now wiped away. And today's going to be an interesting one for the drivers, not the least because they've got to now figure out what the circuit is doing in terms of its surface conditions compared to yesterday, because it will have changed a little bit with the heavy rain shower. There are no damp patches on the circuit anymore because the sun has been out prolifically since 6 a.m. this morning, and it is now just gone 3 p.m. in the afternoon with an air temperature of 35 degrees Celsius, so there's definitely no wet patches on the circuit anymore. But what it will have done is made the circuit very green indeed, as we say, which is basically no surface rubber on the racing line. It'll be a little bit dusty in patches, particularly on the curbs and on the runoff areas, and certainly into some of the faster apexes. So the first 20 minutes or so of the session is just the drivers relearning the conditions of the circuit, learning a feel for the track again, and it will feel slightly different to what it did yesterday for the competitors. The other thing, of course, they'll be doing is getting themselves ready for qualifying tonight. And the track temperatures will be a lot hotter now than they will be for qualifying, because it will have gone a little bit dark compared to what we'll get this afternoon. But these 40 minutes of practice, very important, I have to say, for the drivers to relearn the circuit conditions and get an understanding. You can see them down the main straight, weaving from side to side, trying to get a little bit of heat generated through the tyres and through the brakes so that they can understand what the car is going to do, because this is the kind of circuit where you need to have temperature built in the cars to have the confidence going into turn one. You go down to that first corner, and just after the pole position line on the grid is the 200-meter board. So you've got a very long run from the hairpin down to that first corner, but you've got to have so much confidence when you hit the brakes in between the 150 and 100-meter boards to nail the car into that first corner. If you've got no confidence in the brakes and tyres, then you're just going to slide on into the runoff area at the first chicane, and that's going to ruin any chance you have of a competitive lap. So 75 points left in the season. The championship after yesterday, which saw Kip Bolowski take the race victory ahead of Adam Alazari and Scott Kind-Lindblom, with Tibor Ramekes in 4th position. Essentially then, the top 4 drivers in the championship finished in the top 4 places in the race, despite the difficulties of the rain. And I have to say, while we've got an opportunity to talk about this, a massive shout out to the drivers here at Saudi Arabia in the Jeddah Corniche circuit, because in yesterday's race, the circuit was so difficult in terms of grip. There were parts of the circuit that were dry, parts of the circuit that were wet. There was about 5-6 laps into the race. The drivers were telling me that after about 6 laps, 7 laps, there was no grip at all from the tyres, because essentially there wasn't enough water left on the circuit to bite into the tread of the wet tyre compound. So guessing your way around the circuit was very much the last 5 to 6 laps of racing. Adam Alazari was telling me he was essentially steering the car through some of the faster apexes with the rear of the car, just letting the car come around a little bit, just so that he could almost power slide his way through some of the tighter apexes in the chicanes, and certainly in the final hairpin, using the back of the car to just power slide a little bit through the turns because of how little grip the front end was generating. So very interesting to see what the drivers have been doing to learn the difficulties of conditions. But I wanted to give a shout out to them because there wasn't a single driver in yesterday's race who pitched it into the wall and retired. Very impressive performances from all of the competitors so far. In fact, it was the 4th race in a row yesterday without a single retirement in the championship. They've been learning all the way through the season. In the first 3 races of the year at Bahrain International, the drivers were still a little wet behind the ears, and we had some retirements in the first 3 races, at least 2 per race. But ever since that second race of round 2 in the Bahrain International Circuit, we have had absolutely no retirements over the course of the season. So a fascinating scenario then for our contenders. And that means that the competitors now get to learn all over again. So just talking through what happened yesterday, Kipolowski took the victory, and that puts him now onto 128 points in the championship. Adam Al-Azhari now has 110, and he was much more comfortable yesterday after his result than he was by finishing in the same position 3 days earlier, because this time, second position, he knows, was about where he was going to be after the start when Bolowski started to clear off. But his defensive tactics on Scott Kinley-Limblom yesterday were absolutely fantastic. There might have been a faster pace from Scott Kinley-Limblom, but he never got to show it, because Al-Azhari's racecraft was absolutely immaculate yesterday, defending second position in exactly the right places. And that actually put him back into second position in the Drivers' Championship. So that's how important it was to stay in front of the Swede. He's 18 points back from Kipolowski, which is the same as a second place finish. So there's definitely still opportunities to move forward, but he could really do with a strong result today to bounce back in the championship fight and get that gap down a little bit to the British driver. Of course, for Kipolowski, what he wants to do is come up with another victory to extend the gap to, at the minimum, 25 points. And that would put him into a very preferential position for the last round of the championship at Jeddah. If he went into the last weekend of the season with a 25-point lead, all he would have to do is finish ahead of the driver in second place in the championship, whether that's Scott Lindblom or Adam Al-Azhari at the time, and he would claim the championship title in the penultimate race of the year. As it stands, he will not win the championship this weekend because he doesn't have a big enough advantage to get that done. So he's now got to wait essentially until the next part of the season, which will be on the 5th and 6th of December. So the competitors now racing in a very fine situation. Lewis Werrell ahead of Tibor Ramekes, Abdullah Kamel and Scott Kinley-Limblom. That's the times at the moment. We've just broken into the 2-minute 9s. Obviously pole position was a 2-minute 6. So the competitors just getting used to a very solid run so far. 32 minutes left of the free practice session. Some drivers on track, some about to head out onto the circuit. Kipolowski waiting to get himself out on the circuit for the first time. The gap between Lewis Werrell and Tibor Ramekes at the moment in the free practice session is only 0.03 of a second. Well, the mechanics are just making an adjustment there to Kipolowski's car. Once they've sorted that, he's obviously going to be heading out onto the circuit. But the man who leads the championship by 18 points, certainly feeling quite an interesting battle is coming for him. Scott Kinley-Limblom now moves to the top of the table. 2-minute 8.797, 73 thousandths of a second quicker than Abdullah Kamel. Lewis Werrell, Tibor Ramekes and Rachel Robertson are all within a few tenths of a second of that mark as well. So everybody just getting up to speed with things at the moment. I wouldn't panic too much about Kipolowski staying in the garage at the moment because it's only free practice and there's still plenty of time left in the session. 30 minutes still to run, and he does have the cushion of an 18-point advantage. There is Tibor Ramekes, and just in front of him, Lewis Werrell. We're watching the Belgian at the moment in the Zahid car number 1. Very talented young man, the 15-year-old from Chimay in the Hainaut region of Belgium. He's been part of the VDK racing squad in karting for quite a few years now. Very talented young man is Tibor Ramekes, certainly gaining in stature and prowess all the time. This is his first ever car racing campaign. And when you you take that into consideration, he really has done a fantastic job to be in the top 5 of the F4 Saudi Arabia Championship. Fellow rookie, of course, Kit Bolowski is also in the top 5, and Kit Bolowski is actually leading it. So Lewis Werrell leading the way at the moment on a 208.636 as he's gone into the first position ahead of Scott-Kin Lindblom, Abdullah Carmel and Timo Ramakas. Rachel Robertson currently ahead of Ava Dobson, Kiara Batig and Wojciech Voda. Then Megan Bruce in front of Esme Roosterman. And then we have Parisol Ganji running in 11th position at this precise moment, running a very decent session at the moment in front of Farah Al-Youssef. Adam Al-Azari has just started getting up to speed. That's why he's down in 13th place. And Kit Bolowski has yet to leave the garage, but there's still plenty of time for him to get out on circuit. There is Rachel Robertson. This is her last F4 race before she hops on a plane to the United States. Next week she'll be behind the wheel of a very similar car to this one, but in F1 Academy Tag Heuer colours as she represents that squad. A very good opportunity indeed for the 18-year-old from Edinburgh in Scotland. Although nowadays, of course, thanks to her racing career, she lives in Wiltshire, wanting to be closer to what is affectionately known as Motorsport Valley, which covers about 3 different counties in the United Kingdom. But it's very much the epicenter of motorsport in Great Britain, where so many of the Formula One teams reside. 8 out of 10 of them, to be precise. The only 2 that, of course, are not based in that part of the United Kingdom are the Sauber team and the Ferrari team. There is the 99, Abdullah Carmel. Really starting to find some pace now. Currently in 3rd position, despite what it says on your timing screens in front of you, because Lewis Werrell has done a 208.318. Timo Ramakas has done a 208.556, and has now been displaced as up to the top spot comes Adam Al-Azari. So Adam Al-Azari has gone straight up into 1st place. Purple in all 3 sectors, 46.6 for Sector 1, 40.47 for Sector 2, and 40.64 for Sector 3. That puts Adam Al-Azari up to the top spot in all 3 sectors. So with 27 minutes to go, although it says on your screen at the moment he's in 13, Adam Al-Azari will go to the top of your table once the screen is updated. And it's certainly going very well indeed for him. Lewis Werrell still in 2nd position on that 2-minute 8.318, but when the time updates on your screen, it will be Adam Al-Azari up to the top spot. Looks as though they're nearly ready to send Kit Bolowski out onto the circuit, and there is the proof in the pudding. Adam Al-Azari now on a 207.729 for Team Valvoline, number 12. But it looks to me as though they're just in the closing stages of putting Kit Bolowski out onto the circuit. There is the 23-year-old aerospace engineering student from Riyadh, Farah Al-Youssef, who decided, well, I want to get a little bit closer to the action in my academic studies. Why don't I apply the science I've been learning about aerodynamics and racing car engineering by actually driving them myself and racing them? It was a big task to undertake at the start of the year, under the advice and the stewardship of Graham Glue, who's had so many different charges in his career. But such a fantastic young talent he's been able to nurture in Farah Al-Youssef. She's really made massive leaps and bounds in terms of her prowess. Don't forget, she's not been a natural racing driver compared to everybody else. So she's ended up with lap times a good 5 or 6 seconds off the pace of everybody at times. Bolowski ventures out onto the circuit then for the first time. He's got 26 minutes to put some times down, so that is good news that he gets out onto the circuit after some adjustments to the car. But no, to come back to Farah Al-Youssef, I mean, she's been very impressive since she started her racing journey all the way back in January in the F4 Middle East Championship, and then becoming a wild card in Saudi Arabia on this very circuit. But she's had a season where she's basically been going from 7 to 8 seconds a lap back to 6 seconds a lap back to 4 seconds a lap back. Yesterday in qualifying, she was only 3.5 seconds back. So the amount of progress that a race driver makes over a season is actually something that needs to be given more respect. It needs to be given a little bit more in terms of credence. Okay, they're not going to be winning races and winning championships, but that's not what she's here to do. She's here to learn about the craft of racing cars and how to design great racing cars in the future. So this is a very different task that Farah Al-Youssef has set herself compared to the other drivers out of the grid. They want to aspire and climb up the ladder and win races at Indianapolis, Le Mans, Monaco, you name it. But Farah is very much dedicated to her engineering, and this is a very different task for her. So the more she can continue to knock spots off her times and understand more about pushing on the ragged edge, the better she's going to get at engineering at a time when Al Tawkalat Motorsport is really trying to nurture some talented engineers here in Saudi Arabia. So it's a very impressive and incredibly inspiring decision that she's made to throw her hat into the ring of one of the most competitive disciplines of motorsport on the planet. Farah Sorganji, 17 years of age, from here in Jeddah, as Adam Al-Azhari makes his way back into the pits for more adjustments. Of course, all of the drivers work together to come up with the perfect setup that everybody uses. Very unique to the F4 Saudi Arabia Championship. Everyone uses exactly the same identical race setup rather than coming up with one which is individual to each driver. They all race with the same setup. So, fascinating situation then for all of the contenders as they try and work around the same car setup for each driver. That all comes down to driver talent at the end of the day. So there is Lewis Werrell, currently on a lap time best of 2:08 8.318. His last lap was 2:08 8.366. So the pace is definitely there or thereabouts. So Scott Kim Lindblom has just gone fastest of all in the first sector. So obviously for each of the drivers, it's very important for them to get the most out of their cars at the limit. Lewis Werrell has just gone fastest of all in Sector 1. Kit Bolowski is still warming up the car, so he's not quite at full pace yet. He's got to go through the motions that everybody else has done in the first 2 or 3 laps of just warming the car up. He gets out of the way of Farah Al-Youssef, who is on a flying lap. You can see Kit Bolowski just warming up the tyres and brakes. The championship leader, of course, leading the points race by 18 points over Adam Al-Azhari and by 20 over Scott Lindblom. With this race likely to be the last hurrah for Timo Ramekers, unless he can pull out something spectacular and overcome the 3 drivers ahead of him in the championship fight. But his best result for the season so far is 4th position. And so far, he has only managed to beat the drivers ahead of him in the championship fight on 4 separate occasions this year. And he certainly hasn't beaten all of them over the course of the season. So Kit Bolowski goes into what could be his first flying lap. We'll know when we go through the time sections. Scott Kim Lindblom's just done a 2:08.035. That's 0.3 of a second slower than Adam Al-Azhari's best. Lewis Werrell's done purple sector in Sector 1, personal best in Sector 2, and comparable in Sector 3. That puts him into second place now on a 2:07.998. So he's just inside 0.3 of a second of the pace of Adam Al-Azhari. 4th place at the moment behind Al-Azhari, Werrell and Scott Kim Lindblom is Timo Ramekers, the Belgian, leading rookie at the moment. Chiara Batigue doing a fair job in 5th position as well. She's always really quick in free practice. From cold, Chiara Batigue is very fast out of the blocks. She's had absolutely no luck at all this year in qualifying and race trim. But when you put her in the car straight away from cold, she's able to get up to pace fairly quickly. And that is something that a lot of the decent teams up at the sharp end of Formula One, World Endurance Championship, also over in IndyCar in the States, they'll be looking at things like that. A driver that can literally get straight into the car and be quick out of the blocks is a very valuable driver to have in your team, particularly in the world of hypercars and GTs, because it certainly helps you in the future. And that's something that a young driver of the talent of Chiara Batigue can definitely keep an eye on in the future. What with the new union between Red Bull and Ford. Ford has a very strong GT3 package and, of course, a hypercar package coming in the future. So plenty of opportunities for a driver like Chiara Batigue, who wants to settle her scores at Le Mans one day. Change of tyres for Abdullah Carmel. They certainly can change tyres during free practice. So that is just one of the adjustments that will be made, I'm sure, to get everybody up to higher speed. That is one of the Red Bull cars coming into the pits. I think that is Chiara Batigue, who's moving over to the left-hand side. Is she going to complete the lap, or is she coming down pit road? Very hard to tell from that particular angle. And we don't find out because Rachel Robertson comes into pit lane. Galabatique has indeed come into pit lane. I can see that on the timing screen now. There's Ava Dobson, 16 years of age. She's been racing in GB4 this year out in the United Kingdom, but originally Ava Dobson comes from Milwaukee in the beautiful American state of Wisconsin. She's got a lot of attention and a lot of support here out in Saudi Arabia, particularly from the Americans who are based in Saudi Arabia. Quite a lot of them, of course, have settled here over the last 20 years or so. So she's got a lot of support from the American accented Saudi Arabian population. Following along the American charge, along with the three native drivers to Saudi Arabia, of course. Farah Al Yusuf, the 23-year-old in Team Valvoline. Faris Organji, the 17-year-old, and Abdullah Carmel, the 16-year-old. The latter two, of course, living right here in Jeddah. Abdullah Carmel, in particular, only living about 4 minutes away from the circuit. So he wouldn't have had far to go to dodge the rain last night. There's Adam Al-Azhari, formerly the top spot of the times, but it looks as though his last lap has been deleted for track limits. So Adam Al-Azhari no longer on the top spot. He's now right down at the bottom of the table once again, along with Kit Bolowski, who, by the way, has just moved up into 11th position by crossing the line on a 2:10.4. Al-Azhari's back down to a 2:17.3. His fastest that time deleted due to track limits, but we know that he can go quicker than a 2:07.9, that's for sure. He's managed to do a 2:07.6 before it was taken away from him. So once he gets a clean lap under his belt, that's the kind of pace we're going to be looking at in free practice. And I do think it's only going to be in the 2:07s that we're going to get the fastest times today. 35 degrees Celsius, under the sunshine, not under the floodlights of night yet. That is when the circuit is actually faster. The cooler it is, the faster it is. So it won't be at its peak, this race circuit, until we get to the nighttime phase. Quick change of tyres for Lewis Werrell as we watch the championship leader, Kit Bolowski. Managed to pick up a fantastic victory yesterday under a massive amount of pressure. Third win of the season. And of course, with that, he also became the only driver so far this year to win on 2 different circuits in this championship. He's also the 3rd different race winner in a row. Because of course, we had a victory for Lewis Werrell, then a victory for Scott Lindblom, and now a victory for Kit Bolowski. If Adam Al-Azhari triumphs today, then we're going to have 4 different race winners on the Jeddah Corniche circuit in the same week. It's quite impressive as a stat, really. But certainly Kit Bolowski, the only driver this season to win at both Bahrain and here at Jeddah Corniche. So a very talented young man, considering this is his first ever car racing campaign. There is Esme Klosterman, who is competing in her last F4 Saudi Arabia Championship race today. Sadly, she won't be with us for the season finale. That honour will be handed back to Nina Hardeman, a countrywoman who was there at the first round of the championship, managed to pick up a 2nd and a 3rd place finish, who actually mathematically has the chance to be the top lady driver over the season. With those 2 podiums, she is currently lying in 8th place in the Drivers' Championship on 33 points. Esme Klosterman, who's had 4 ladies' victories in a row, but she's on 28 points, 5 points ahead of Nina Hardeman. But of course, Nina Hardeman might get a chance to move her way back into the leading positions of the ladies' category. So, fascinating stuff. A very different conversation style from Farah Al Yusuf compared to the other drivers. She wants to know all about the mechanics and the science of what's going on. And in an era when drivers are basically told to get in the car and drive and leave all the mechanics and the understanding of the car to the mechanics in the garage, leave it. We know what we're doing. We'll fix the car, thank you. You drive it. We are starting to get a few competitors now who are wanting and have that desire to understand how the car itself actually works, down to its very core components. And Farah Al Yusuf is definitely one of those who studies the inner workings and interiors of these race cars in many different categories, not just in F4, with a fascinating interest. And it really is quite a joy to to see racing drivers taking that old school approach. It used to be back in the day, of course, when racing drivers didn't just drive the cars, they got underneath them in between sessions. They figured out what part of the suspension was loose, where there was a little bit of efficiency in terms of the push rods and the track rods. They really understood the science and the language of a race car from its inner workings. And that's just something that doesn't happen quite so much in the modern world. It still does, of course, but nowhere near as much as it used to. So Kip Bolowski has gone back to the top spot. Didn't take him long. 2 minutes 7.825, a tenth of a second clear of Lewis Werrell. Everybody else, by the way, has come into the pits, changed tyres and gone back out again. Adam Alazari has done the same, of course, has gone back out onto the circuit now in the hope that he can move his way back up the table once more. Fastest driver in Sector 1 is actually Lewis Werrell on a 46.523. Fastest driver in Sector 2 and Sector 3 is Kip Bolowski. Ava Dobson's crew going to work, and that looks to me like Jonathan Wells himself adjusting the tyre pressures on those Pirellis. He is, of course, the manager of motorsport out here in the Middle East for Pirelli. He's been so hands-on in figuring out the best tactics and the best setup on PSIs for the Pirellis here. There's not many people who are the head of motorsport competition of a company like Pirelli who would be down there with gloves on, getting his hands dirty, knees down on the road, trying to understand the language and the code of the setup of these cars. So it's incredibly heartwarming, and I have to say very much a revelation in the modern era to see someone like Jonathan Wells down there working on the tyres himself, something he knows very well, of course. It really is his lifeblood. And so to be the one down there adjusting the tyre pressures and making sure everybody understands the setting of these Pirelli tyres, heartwarming to know that someone is that dedicated and that committed to their craft. Abdullah Carmel, currently P6. The fans here have one chance left until December to see their home favourite grab a podium finish. He's come agonisingly close to it over the course of the season so far. 4th position in the first race of the season, of course, in Bahrain. Had a 5th place finish on Tuesday night. And, of course, also managed to qualify 3rd position on the grid for the very first race of this week back on Monday. Stalled it at the start. We'll never know if he would have had the pace outright to go for that podium finish. He certainly fought his way back from dead last to 8th position. A very admirable drive, but very unfortunate that it wasn't converted then into a podium. But the local fans here keep returning every day. They're not giving up. They're not backing down from the support of this young lad. And it really is amazing. He has so many fans swarming around him at the end of every race down in the pit lane. They all want to come and have a conversation. They want to get his autograph. They want to get pictures with him. He is their next big hope in the world of Grand Prix racing. Abdullah Carmel, a real talent for the future. Raced in the F4 Middle East Championship at the start of the season. Also competed for AKM Motorsport in the Euro 4 title, which takes place in Italy. And, of course, racing here on home soil at Jeddah Corniche in the F4 Saudi Arabia Championship. And he's a good talent, a very insightful competitor. Always digs deep to bring more out of himself. He's got a good chance to really come away with some silverware here. But then, to be fair, this is one of the most competitive and talented bunch of F4 drivers I've seen for a long time. Amazing to think that we talk so much about the mistakes that the drivers make and the difficulties that the drivers face. To go through such a treacherous race as yesterday in the damp and wet and greasy conditions, and not to see a single driver put it in the wall, that speaks volumes. Real talent on display here in the F4 Saudi Arabia Championship. I've seen many other F4 series where just the basic of mistakes will put somebody into the barriers and into the wall. And considering that we've got 14 competitors from all over the globe here, and not a single one of them was over erratic in their driving yesterday. Nobody really dropped it into the barriers at all. And although there were some very close race battles, there wasn't really any contact that I saw last night either. So again, something that the drivers should definitely be getting a pat on the back for. And testimony that all of the work from Al Tawkalat Motorsport to even the competition and the playing field has also done a lot of work to mature them as well. So with everybody getting themselves into a good position, around the course. We now have Adam Alazari back up to the top. 2 minutes 7.617, and he's just gone fastest of all in the first sector again at a 46.510, 40.6 for the second sector, and hopefully a comparable one in the third sector to keep his hopes alive here. But on the cusp of it, this is a big opportunity for Adam Alazari. Taking the win here today will matter massively because it will give him at least 7 points more than Kip Bolowski. If he were to finish second, it would certainly be just a 7-point gain, but that would give the momentum to him going into the 3-week gap between race events, because obviously they'll be back here on the 5th and 6th of December for the last 2 races of the season. And with only 50 points on offer in that last weekend, every point you can score now really is critical. So Scott Lindblom coming towards us. He has taken a win so far this year, although it was technically handed to him by a 5-second penalty for 2 of his rivals. But as he said, as soon as he got the word that that was the case, he knew he had to work with his engineer to close back and find the time to make himself the winner of that race. So he said, okay, it's not how I want to win, but a win is a win, and you have to take every opportunity you're given because you never know what it's going to lead to at the end of the season. And he's full of confidence coming into this one. He had a very solid run last night, but he really wants a victory. That would put him straight back into the hunt for the championship. And a win would actually put him back into second place of the Drivers' Championship, whatever happens. So that will be a very, very exciting opportunity for him. If he were to take the win and Kip Bolowski were to not score, then he would actually take the lead of the championship. So it tells you just how much is still up for grabs in this F4 Saudi Arabia Championship. And this championship has yet to have the big controversial moment. We've had a lot of battles between drivers wheel to wheel, and we've certainly had some great races out on the circuit, but there's not been any real controversy other than maybe the 5-second penalty for the safety car restart infringement handed to Alazari and Lewis Werrell. Other than that, it's been very much about the racing on track. It hasn't been about the controversy and drama off track. As out onto the circuit again goes Farah Al Youssef to rejoin the circuit with her other competitors. But hopefully the drama is going to be confined to racing on the circuit rather than to boiling over to other things. But certainly the racing has been fantastic so far this year. And the 4 different race winners have definitely shown us quite a lot. Kip Bolowski, Adam Alazari, Scott Lindblom and Lewis Werrell. But 3 races to go, 75 points available, and 18 points is the gap between first and second place. Adam Alazari. So this is where today becomes quite an important race to get right. Whoever wins definitely takes the psychological upper hand into the 3-week break. As Kip Bolowski goes faster still on a 2:07.335. That puts him to the top spot now. So Kip Bolowski goes back onto the top of the table ahead of Adam Alazari and Scott Lindblom. There is Lewis Werrell, the man in 4th position at the moment. He bagged pole position yesterday, don't forget. So being down in 4th position now is definitely not a concern at the moment. Still got plenty more to do. Meanwhile, behind the top 4, who we kind of all expected to be in the positions they're in 5th place at the moment is Rachel Robertson. Very good run so far from Robertson, who's making massive progress in terms of her confidence, in terms of her one-lap pace, and certainly in terms of her understanding of the race car. She spent the entirety of 2025 competing in the Radical Cup UK Series, finished top 3 in the championship, very admirable indeed, but of course a very different race car to the F4, so it's almost night and day of difference in terms of the driving acumen that you need for those particular cars. And so Kip Bolowski ahead of Adam Alazari, Scott Lindblom, Lewis Werrell and Rachel Robertson in P5. That tells you a lot about her development, actually. Having said that, she has just been pipped to 5th position on the lap by Tibor Ramekers, who finds a few hundredths of a second more than Rachel Robertson. But still, to be right up there on the pace and within a second of the pole sitter, well, the top spot, I should say, is very impressive indeed. In fact, having said that, Adam Alazari is back on top again because the time from Kip Bolowski has been deleted. I'm assuming due to a track limits infringement, but that 2:07.335 lap is now erased. He's still in second place in the timesheets as Adam Alazari is communicating with his engineer what he feels behind the wheel. And I think the international sign language there tells us that that's something to do with the handling that he wants to go over. Esme Hosterman, the fabulous 20-year-old, doing an amazing job in this category. 4 Ladies' Cup race wins in a row. And right up there in the top 6 for the majority of this season as well. Certainly here in Jeddah, she's found the pace after the struggles in Bahrain. She is so much quicker in Jeddah. And she will want to bow out of this championship on her terms. She wants to finish strong. So that will be a big opportunity for her to try and gain some time and gain some ground. She takes a little bit of time to get up to speed, as Esme Hosterman, but in the race itself, boy, does she find the energy and the momentum to move her way further forward. Definitely works out in her favour. From Wells, just keeping an eye on things there on the right rear tyre, the Pirelli. And everybody trying to get an understanding now of Adam Al-Azhari's setup, which of course is meant to be identical to everybody else's, but the drivers still give feedback as to what they're feeling. Fastest first sector of the entire session for Scott Kinn Lindblom. So the Red Bull Junior from Sweden, 15 years of age from Falun, which is ski cross-country World Cup country. But here, a very different style of slide for Scott Kinn Lindblom as he slides into the first sector top spot, 46.366. Fastest of all in the second sector, by the way, is Adam Al-Azhari. Fastest of all in the third sector is Kibalowski. But whether it will stay that way in the final 4 minutes of the free practice session, we don't know. It's usually around this sort of time that the best lap times tend to be produced in the F4 category. Scott Kinn Lindblom has done a 40.385 in the first sector, so that bodes quite well. As Farisol Ganji has just got out of the way of Ava Dobson and Megan Bruce, who both look like they've started push laps. Scott Kinn Lindblom looking like he could get himself into the top 3 here. 46.3 in sector 1, 40.385 in the second. We know that it's not easy to string purple sectors across all 3 of these sections of the course. Certainly Lewis Werrell didn't get a single purple sector yesterday, but a really solid performance nonetheless. And across the line comes Scott Kinn Lindblom to go top. 207.592 from the Swede. A very consistent run over the 3 sectors. But that first sector has really benefited him as Kibalowski has just gone fastest of all in the third sector. A 40.631 this time, and that puts him on a 207.678, which means that the top 3 drivers in free practice 2 are separated by, get this, 0.086. Adam Al-Azhari is out of the car, his helmet is off, he's already going over data and debrief with his engineers. He's not getting into the car again during this session. He's been a lot more cheerful and a lot more bubbly this part of the weekend. It's actually not his father that's with him this time, it's his brother who's popped over to come and see him. Keanu Al-Azhari, 18 years of age yesterday. Very talented racer across the European single-seater categories, now Formula Regional level. Prolific race winner here in the Middle East and in Europe in single-seaters. And great to see him supporting his brother as he goes on his own quest of glory. And they're such a fantastic family in terms of supporting each other. They really do have each other's backs, even though they're obviously both racing drivers and they do occasionally get to race each other. But the internal support between the 2 brothers really is wonderful to see. I've witnessed it several times in karting and single-seaters, and they are so determined to get each other having a wonderful race of it. So now we've got Lewis Werrell moving up to the top spot, a 207.551. Very impressive stuff. Now the top 4 drivers are separated by 0.122, at least until Kibalowski comes across the line. And he's done a 207.35. That's very comparable to the first big time he set that was eventually deleted for a track limits excursion. But that puts him back to the top. And the top 4 drivers now in the session are covered by 0.26 of a second. Of course, Adam Al-Azhari is not going to go out again because he doesn't have time to now, even if he wanted to go back out and sort himself up to the top spot. Personal best second sector for Scott Kinn Lindblom. That puts him on a 207.596. That's 0.004 of a second slower than his best, as Lewis Werrell having just done a 2:07.551, has gone faster than he's gone before in the second sector, and only about 600ths of a second slower than the best first sector time that we've seen so far. Kipolowski has done a similar one likewise, so we're going to see some really big laps at the end here. Tibor Ramekers is on a fairly tasty lap as well, actually, so he might be able to push himself into the top 5. As now coming down pit lane is Abdullah Carmel. He won't do better than 7th place, unfortunately. Werrell across the line, 2:07.524. He's gained a few thousandths of a second on his own personal best. So not a bad run at all from Lewis Werrell. But still everybody there around a 2:07.5, a 2:07.6. Apart from Kipolowski, who's done a 2:07.3. What about Tibor Ramekers? What's he going to produce? Because Esme Oosterman's just done a 2:08.8. Chiara Batigue is on a 46.8 for the first sector, so this is her best lap so far, if she can hold this together. Scott Lindblom is there or thereabouts in the first and second, but I don't think he's going to make an improvement, so it wouldn't shock me if he peels into the pits. Tibor Ramekers finishes on a 41.0 for the third sector, so that's his best time, but it's a 2:08.208, within a second of the top spot of Kipolowski though, so plenty to be excited about as Rachel Robertson has moved back into 5th position with a 2:08.062. So very good work from Rachel Robertson to be top 5. Chiara Batigue is still pushing on the second sector. 40.87 for the second split. Is Chiara Batigue about to go into 5th position because Tibor Ramekers does not improve and he will not be any higher than P6. But Batigue comes through 40.8 in the third sector, only good enough for 8th place. So there you have it. The checkered flag is out on the circuit. Werrell crosses the line. Scott Lindblom has also crossed the line, so nobody is going to take the top spot away from Kipolowski. He's come back into the pits. And so there we have it. Free practice 2. Despite sitting in the pits for a long time, it goes the way of Kipolowski with a 2:07.357 lap ahead of Lewis Werrell, Scott Lindblom and Adam Alazari. Brilliant run from Rachel Robertson. Top 5 is fantastic for the 18-year-old. Tibor Ramekers, Abdullah Carmel and Chiara Batigue in 8th position ahead of Esme Oosterman in what will be her last race of the championship, and Ava Dobson in P10. Behind them, 11th position will go the way of Wojciech Woda, the Polish driver who managed to score points for the first time last night after a brilliant battle that put him ahead of Chiara Batigue and Rachel Robertson, actually. 12th position, well, that was a very tough run in the end, going the way of Megan Bruce. And then 13th position for Faris Organji, the 17-year-old from here in Jeddah. And Farah Al Yusuf came up with a 2:13.2 in the end. So a very solid effort from the free practice session number 2, the last free practice session of November. And it's the championship leader, Kipolowski, that leads the way by just over a 1/10 of a second. The top 4 covered by just over a 1/4 of a second. The top 6 covered by less than a second. So plenty to get excited about as we get ourselves ready for qualifying. That will be just after 6 p.m. local time here. It may be sunny now, but it will be dark under the floodlights later. And the fight for pole position will continue. From Jake Sanson here in the commentary box, we'll be back for more from the F4 Saudi Arabia Championship presented by Aramco. Ready for qualifying for round 4, race 2.